My name is Megan Owens. I am the program manager with the Alumni Relations here at UAH, and we are so glad that you are joining us for today's Charger Chat with Botanica Huntsville. And I wanted to let you know we are going to be recording today's Charger Chat. So if you would like to turn off your camera, you can do so now. We also are going to have a little bit of a question and answer portion, and so feel free to ask Caitlin questions through the chat feature. You can submit them through the chat, and then we will ask them when we get to that part of the Charger Chat. So now I'd like to introduce you to Caitlin Hastings. She is the owner of Botanica Huntsville, and she is going to be talking to us today about all things plants. Caitlin, we are so excited to have you today, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I kind of wanted to take this opportunity to talk to you guys about some good plants for your office or your home office, because so many people are working from home now or working remotely, and just talk about the benefits of having plants in your space, because while they are beautiful and everyone loves to look at them, they truly do have some really great health benefits. And there are a lot of studies going on around the world that are kind of trying to break this down more. And so I wanted to touch on that a little bit. There are studies in the US, in Europe, in Japan, and they're all kind of just showing the different benefits on the mental health of humans. And I love talking about plants, and I also happen to be a science nerd because I'm a physician assistant in real life. So I appreciate the data that's coming out in support of this plant therapy, if you will. That's what I like to call it. So some of these studies are suggesting a few things, and I'll kind of break this down a little bit more. But studies are showing that having plants in your home, in your office, just interacting with plants in general, helps to lower anxiety and stress. It helps boost creativity. It improves concentration and memory, increases productivity, and essentially lowers your blood pressure and heart rate just by simply having plants around. Obviously, I have no shortage of them in my house, so I can vouch for that. So how does this work though? What's the mechanism here? How are plants doing all of this? So essentially what's going on here is just the presence of plants and being around plants helps to suppress your central nervous system, your sympathetic nervous system. And so all that means is your sympathetic nervous system is that fight or flight response, your stress response. So when you encounter a stressful situation at work or at home or throughout the day, typically your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up. That's the stress response. That's what our bodies do. And so plants can help to lower that stress response and help lower heart rate, help lower blood pressure, and essentially just really help, have more health benefits for humans. And so they're just suppressing the stress response, which is important, especially in a work environment, because we all do encounter stressors in our day-to-day jobs. So plants obviously have some other benefits too. They absorb carbon dioxide and other toxins from the air inside of our homes and offices, like formaldehyde and things like that are just naturally found from having appliances and technology around. And in turn, they are releasing oxygen for us to breathe. So they clean the air. They also add humidity and moisture to the air if you have a lot of plants in one area. So increasing the humidity is good inside of your homes, because increased humidity or less dry air inside of your home can actually help keep respiratory illnesses at bay. And so think, common cold, sore throat, things like that. COVID. I joke with my husband all the time that the reason that he and I and none of our employees have gotten COVID is because we have so many plants around. So that's not scientific. I don't know if that's actually true, but plants do increase the humidity inside of your homes and offices. And so that can certainly help keep respiratory illnesses at bay. So the more you know. So despite the cool factor of plants, or whether or not you like plants or, know much about plants, I think the bottom line here that a lot of these studies are showing is that interacting with plants and just having plants, in your presence, on your desk, on your bedside table, whatever, they seem to have a beneficial impact on humans and our mental health and our stress levels. And I think that's important. And so when it comes to plants, I always say the more the merrier. It certainly can't hurt to have them around. So we at Botanica, we do, help people pick out plants. And if you kind of, if you're new at it, we have tons of good recommendations that we can kind of start you out with and teach you how to care for those, how often to water, what kind of light you're going to need, that kind of stuff. And so today, since we're kind of talking about office plants and things like that, I wanted to kind of show you guys some examples of just some easy starter plants, some low maintenance plants that you that would do well in an office environment. And so these are, gonna, like I said, gonna be easy plants, gonna be things that you don't have to water super often. So I'm gonna run through a few of those for you guys just to kind of give you an idea. I've got some examples here, and then, like I said, we can totally take questions at the end if you guys have anything for me. So probably the easiest plant to start out with, especially in an office setting, is gonna be a snake plant. I know a lot of people may not have windows in an office environment, or they may not be close to a window. So you may not be working with much lighting other than like overhead fluorescent lighting. So snake plants are really good in that type of environment. So there are tons of different snake plants. There's like little guys like this that just don't grow super tall. And then there's other snake plants that do grow taller. They're all in the same family. They all only have to be watered once, maybe twice a month. And these can thrive with just fluorescent lighting in an office environment. So I do like to start people with a snake plant if they don't have a lot of lighting in their office. Another easy plant is called the ZZ plant. So this is kind of in the same vein as the snake plant in that it only has to be watered about once a month. It's going to store a lot of moisture in its roots. And so even if the soil on this one feels super dry, it really doesn't have to have much water at all or much light. And so this one's another really good one for fluorescent lighting. And these are all things that we carry at the shop. So we'll be happy to help point these out to you if you want to swing by the store and pick anything like this up. There's another type of succulent. This is called a Hayworthia. Typically succulents do need a lot of light, so I don't recommend them for an office environment. I think people think succulents are easy because they don't need a lot of water, but where people go wrong is they don't give them enough light. And so I've had so many people tell me, oh, I can't even keep succulents alive. And usually the problem is, maybe they're not watering it, a lot, which is fine, but they're also not giving it enough light. And so in an office environment without many windows, you may run into that problem. But this is one succulent, the Hayworthia, that can do well in an office environment. So just fluorescent lighting, if you have that, you can water this guy about once a month as well. And then there's this plant called the Fittonia or the nerve plant. It's got really pretty veining on the leaves. This is one of my favorite plants for any beginner because it talks to you. It tells you exactly when it's thirsty. The whole plant is just going to kind of faint and go lifeless, and you're going to think you've killed it. And all you do is add water, and within an hour, it perks right back up. So in a busy office environment, this may be a really nice plant for you because it will tell you when it's thirsty. So if you get busy and forget about it, no big deal. It'll talk to you and let you know what it needs. And then I've just got one more here to show you guys, just another plant that's like good at cleaning the air and kind of, has a nice little tropical vibe for your office or your desk. This is called a parlor palm. And this one just has a little bit more bushiness to it, a little bit more of a statement plant. And this one will grow straight up, so you don't have to worry about it getting in the way of anything. But these typically do well with, lower lighting settings. And this one will have to be watered about once a week or so. So a little bit more high maintenance here, but we do have some really good options for you guys. So with that, I know I kind of flew through everything. I wanted to make sure that I didn't take up too much of your time on your lunch break, and, that we had plenty of time for questions at the end. So you guys feel free to ask away. I'm all yours.
Okay, our first question is, I have golden pothos. Is that how you say that? Is there a strategy to prevent them from vining everywhere?
So they are by nature vining plants. So unfortunately, no matter how much you cut them back, their tendency is going to be to vine. If you don't want them to vine, one thing that you can do is put a little stake or like a moss pole or a bamboo pole or something in the center of the pot, and you can kind of train that plant, like pin it up to that trellis, and you can train it to grow upward. And so we call that like a pothos totem pole. We sell those, sometimes in that fashion. So instead of it trailing, it does need something to attach onto so that it can continue if you don't want it to trail.
Awesome. We actually, this is cute. A couple people have asked this question, what ferns are best in low light setting? And then someone else also asked in tandem with that, describe ideal environment for ferns.
Absolutely. So when we're talking about ferns, there are I like to put them in two separate groups. So there are just kind of your normal, like jungly kind of ferns that love humidity and they like lower light and they love moisture. And then there are epiphytic ferns, and all that fancy word means. Epiphytic just means that in nature, instead of those growing in like a moist, humid ground environment, the epiphytic ferns grow on the sides of trees and rocks. They actually attach themselves to other living organisms instead of growing in soil, and they will leach the nutrients that they need out of like tree bark or a wet rock or moss or something like that. So in my experience, the epiphytic ferns are a little bit more hardy. These are going to be things like your bird's nest ferns and your staghorn ferns. And I didn't bring any of those with me. I'm sure I have some around my house somewhere. So your staghorn ferns and your bird's nest ferns are going to be a little bit more tolerant to different lighting situations. They can do low light, bright light. They can tend to dry out a little bit more, and they don't require near as much humidity because they're just kind of happy to be there. They're happy wherever you put them. Your other ferns, kind of the more traditional ferns, like your maidenhair ferns, and there's a million of them, but for the most part, ferns typically love a very humid environment to keep the tips from turning brown, and they don't really like to dry out all the way. So you'll notice the fronds on your ferns get very brown and crispy if they dry out all the way. So good rule of thumb is just to kind of water them before the soil completely dries out. Stick a little humidifier nearby, or you can mist them if you have a little plant sprayer. And with lighting, they don't like really harsh direct sunlight. So lower light, like an office setting, would be totally fine if you just had some fluorescent lighting, or just kind of indirect light, back away from a window a little bit. So they do tend to be a little bit more high maintenance. For me, I typically go with those epiphytic ferns, like the bird's nest ferns and the staghorn ferns. And we do carry both of those at our stores as well.
Oh my goodness, I love that. We have a question of where is your store located and what are your hours?
Absolutely. So our Huntsville location, we also have one in Birmingham. Our Huntsville location is located on Governor's Drive. So down near Huntsville Hospital, there's like a new Starbucks and a new Chick-fil-A right there. We're just a few doors down from Chick-fil-A. So we're right there on Governor's Drive. The address is 414 Governor's Drive Southwest. You can't miss us if you're on Governor's Drive. There's a big decal on the windows that say plants, plants, plants. So if you see that, you're in the right place. We do have a parking lot, ample parking for our customers, and always people there to help. Our hours, we're open every day of the week except Monday. Monday we take off just to water all of the plants in the store. You can imagine what a big undertaking that is. So that requires an entire day in itself to do that. So our hours are Tuesday through Saturday, 11 to 6. And then Sundays, we are open from 12 to 5. So I personally like Sundays to be my plant shopping day. So I wanted us to be available on Sundays in case anyone else was that way, and kind of put all their, home projects off to the end of the week. So we are open on Saturdays and Sundays.
That's me. I wait till Sundays sometimes. Caitlin, can you recommend a plant that's tough enough to stand up to kittens that try to shred all plants?
So yeah, kittens can be it's tough and it's tricky. I would say typically snake plants, the ones like these guys that I mentioned, are pretty hardy. Now, if you look these up, they are going to say that they are mildly toxic to pets, and that's kind of the problem. The plants that are non-toxic to pets typically aren't as hardy. They're like your ferns and your palms and wispy things that cats just love to get their little paws on. So I would say if you can get a snake plant and just kind of keep it away from the cat, it's like I said, mildly toxic, so it will not kill them. It may just cause some upset stomach. So snake plants are great. And then ferns are also really nice, like those hardier bird's nest ferns and staghorn ferns, things like that. Typically, they're a little bit more hardy for kittens, and they are pet safe. The peperomia family is another family that's also pet safe, and they have some waxy, hardy leaves on some of the peperomia plants. I didn't bring any of those as examples, but peperomia family is all going to be pet safe.
Thank you. Can you tell us about ear plants and what type of care do they require?
Yes. Any plants in particular, or we carry an array of all different kinds of things. So we've got plants that are good for low light situations, bright light situations, pet safe. We have some that are just really low maintenance, and others that are on the rarer side. So I like to say that we have something for everyone. And like I said, our staff is very, very highly qualified, and they know everything there is to know about plants, every plant that we sell. And so any questions that you have about any particular plant that you're buying or anything you're looking for, our staff can definitely help with that. We pride ourselves on being able to answer your questions, educating our customers. We never want to be like a stuffy, pretentious plant store where people feel like they can't ask us questions. I think that's important. I was always overwhelmed when I would walk into Lowe's and Home Depot, and I never knew if the little tag on the plant was accurate or not. And no one there can ever answer your questions. And so that's kind of how Botanica started. We wanted to give people a space with awesome, healthy plants and knowledgeable staff that could answer your questions and help. So we're trying to do that.
Yes. We have a question, I think, in tandem with this. Do you only carry house plants?
So yeah, we specialize in indoor plants. Now, indoor plants are all grown outdoors somewhere in the world. Typically like in Florida and tropical places in Asia and things like that. And we try to mimic those conditions indoors, because that type of stuff, like the tropical plants that can live in Florida, unfortunately won't survive in Alabama outdoors. So we carry specifically indoor plants. There are some that you can take outdoors and leave outdoors year round. Like we have a few cold hardy plants, but there are so many other nurseries and garden shops already. We wanted to just kind of stick with our niche and just stick with the indoor plants. So certainly you can take some of that stuff outdoors and bring it back in before the frost hits in the wintertime. But for the most part, everything that we sell is going to be targeted to thrive inside of your home or office.
Love that. I am going to get the name of this plant wrong. I know it, but there are two people asking about this particular plant.
Okay.
What is the magic of keeping, okay, here it goes, calatheas moist?
Calatheas, yeah.
Calatheas, I was close. So what is the magic of keeping calatheas moist without overwatering them into an early death? And then this, the second question from someone else about this particular plant is, how should I best care for my calathea? The leaves tend to perpetually stay brown and a little wilty.
Absolutely. Calatheas are kind of one of the more difficult families. Everybody loves them because they're beautiful. Their leaves have really cool patterns on them, like little pink stripes or polka dots, things like that. They are particularly finicky though. So good rule of thumb with your calatheas, you don't want to let the soil dry out all the way. You want to kind of keep it consistently moist. And then humidity is key with calatheas. So I had mentioned earlier, we sell some small humidifiers at Botanica that just sit next to your plants. So you could put a small humidifier nearby. That'll keep the leaves from getting crispy. They also don't like a ton of sunlight, so I tend to keep them back away from the windows a good bit. Instead of a humidifier, you could also mist the leaves once or twice a week. Or another trick that I've learned, this is the only way I've been able to keep calatheas and like maidenhair ferns, things that are really, really particular. The only way I've been able to keep them alive is to actually put a pebble tray underneath the plant. I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with that concept, but it's super simple. You just take a little plate or a saucer or something, put some rocks in the top of it, and then you're going to sit the plant on top of the rock. So once you have that set up, you're just going to pour water into that pebble tray until the water is flush with the top of the rocks. So you basically want the plant to sit right on top of the rocks and there to be water underneath the rocks. So the goal here is not even necessarily to like bottom water the plant. You want that water in the pebble tray to evaporate around the plant. And as it does, that's going to increase the humidity around the plant. So it's kind of like a built-in humidifier. You just have to refill that pebble tray every few days once it dries out. But that's also a good way if you don't want to invest in a humidifier, you don't want to deal with having to spray the plant all the time. A pebble tray works wonders. And so that'll also kind of help keep the soil consistently moist as well as that water evaporates. So I highly recommend a pebble tray. And calatheas are they're kind of just difficult. So if you're doing well with one, you can keep anything alive, I'm convinced.
Oh, that's so neat. I hadn't heard about the pebble tray. That's really a neat technique. I like that. Okay, here's another plant that I'm probably going to butcher the name of it. But
You're doing great.
how do you know when a haworthia needs water?
Yes. Okay. So this was the Haworthia, the succulent that I had mentioned before. Good rule of thumb with succulents, I just kind of fill the soil if you can. If the soil feels wet at all, don't water it. Succulents and cacti too, they are particularly good at storing a lot of moisture in their leaves and their stems. And so even if the soil feels really, really dry, you can bet that plant has a lot of moisture reserved in its leaves. So they're drought tolerant. They are used to going without water for long periods of time. So it's always best not to overwater them. I typically set out to water all of my succulents and cacti once a month. And if they start to get a little bit shrivelly, if I notice that the leaves are shriveling up, you can always add more water. You can start watering twice a month. They probably won't need any more than that if they're indoors, because that water is just not going to evaporate out very quickly in your home or office. So once or twice a month for your cacti and succulents and the Haworthias, that's usually enough.
Perfect. What are the best vining plants for the office?
The pothos that someone mentioned earlier is fantastic. There are tons of different varieties of pothos. There are just plain green ones. There are ones with all kinds of colors on the leaves. So you can really get a nice variety with pothos, and we do sell those at the shop as well. So they do well with kind of a range of lights. So low light, bright light. If you get good light in your office, they'll be great. If you don't get good light in your office and you just have fluorescent lighting, they'll be great. And you really will not have to water those super often if they're indoors, probably once every 7 to 10 days, maybe every 2 weeks if your office environment doesn't get a ton of light. So good rule of thumb with all plants is I always just fill the soil to check if it needs to be watered. I don't judge based on how it looks to me. I feel it. And like I said, some plants are going to be happy drying completely out. So then you know not to water until the soil is dry. And there are other plants like your ferns and your calatheas that do like to stay a little bit more consistently moist. So if you feel it and the top part feels dry, that's a good those more finicky plants.
Perfect. Caitlin, do you have any tips for separating plant arrangements?
Yeah, so if you can, they do make like a knife, like a root knife that will kind of help separate the roots on some plants that have grown in the same pot together. But typically you can just kind of take your individual plants if they're in the same pot and you can kind of tease the roots out away from each other. I think a lot of people are worried they're going to injure the plant or hurt the plant if they, are not super careful. And plants are pretty tolerant. If you can kind of just tease the roots out, they're usually pretty easy to separate.
Love that. That always seems daunting to me when you have to separate them.
Yes, yes. We offered a repotting class last month. We're offering some Zoom classes. Like this month, we're doing plant propagation. We're also doing a plant mounting class so that people can learn how to mount things like staghorn ferns on their walls that look really cool. And then we're also teaching a class on plant pests and how to treat them. So another thing you run into with plants, especially if they're, typically from like Lowe's or Home Depot, they're not the healthiest. So they come into your home, they bring pests with them, mealy bugs, spider mites, that kind of stuff, and they do spread to other plants. And so we're going to kind of teach people how to identify them and treat them right away. So if you guys are interested in learning more or anything like that, like I said, we really try to educate our customers and help you guys out as much as possible so you can keep things alive and happy. But you can sign up on our website for those classes. They're Sunday nights at 7:30. We go live on Zoom and do just the same kind of thing. And we just kind of, talk and take questions. And it's been very helpful, I think, for a lot of people. The ones we did last month, everybody kind of signed back up for classes this month. So that's a good sign, I think.
That is a good sign. Yes. I'm going to need you and maybe some other people that have asked questions to read or to do another repotting class.
Yes, absolutely. We can do that for sure.
Good. The questions keep coming in. So Caitlin, you just tell me if you're still good to go.
I'm good to go. You just keep asking.
Okay, perfect. Are there any fragrant indoor plants that you could recommend?
So there are some people like to do herbs as indoor plants, like in indoor container gardens. So those obviously are pretty aromatic. For the most part, are the tropical foliage plants that we have. They're usually not super fragrant. All plants will bloom and produce a flower at some point, and the flowers are typically fragrant. But what you find with indoor plants is your indoor environment typically isn't enough for them to produce flowers and bloom. So if you have something like a peace lily, for example, inside of your home, but it's never bloomed, it's not a big deal. The plant can totally survive without its flowers. It just kind of produces more leaves, more foliage instead of for like the look of the foliage and like the big lush leaves and things like that. So not typically your fragrant type plants.
Yes. Okay. So you mentioned peace lily. I was actually talking about a peace lily that I haven't killed yet. And then there's someone who has asked a question. She has a 5-year-old peace lily, and it has a sentimental meaning to her, which has been droopy for the last several months. They tried a bigger pot, a smaller pot. They tried moving it around the house for different lighting, etc. Yesterday, as a last-ditch effort, they rinsed the roots and put it in a pot of water, and it looks so good and happy. She said it's not drooping at all. Looks like it has been the best in months, if not years. So what is the secret to making this peace lily happy long term?
Absolutely. Peace lilies are drama queens. They're one of those plants that talk to you and tell you if they're not happy. They do get kind of sad and droopy when they need water and things like that. And so in my experience, anytime you repot a peace lily, which it sounds like yours was time to repot if you've had it for 5 years, so no harm there. They do tend to kind of freak out and go into transplant shock. And of course, that's not what you want to see when something has like sentimental value and you've had it for so long. So I would say, the best thing to do with plants when you do repot, just make sure that pot that you're going up in size with is not too big. So what I tell people, when you repot, measure the diameter of the pot that your plant is currently in. So let's say like this, for example, is in a 4-inch diameter pot. So if I'm going to repot this, I only want to go up in pot size, diameter size, 1 to 2 inches at a time. So I would only go up to a 5 or a 6-inch pot if I was repotting a 4-inch plant. So maybe your peace lily was in like a 10-inch pot, probably a little bit larger plant. You could go up to an 11 or a 12-inch diameter pot. So that's just to prevent, you having a pot that's too big for your plant, because essentially you're just going to put a plant with not a huge root system in a huge pot pot and you're going to fill it with dirt, and the roots kind of get suffocated under all of that dirt. And so you want the roots still to be able to breathe. So if you can just go up in pot size a little bit at a time, just slowly but surely, that's the best way to make sure that your plant doesn't go into transplant shock. So take your peace lily that you've got now, it sounds like it's perked up in the water, and just kind of take a look at that root system. And I would just kind of try to judge what size pot it needs to go in. So when in doubt, a smaller pot is typically a little bit better, just so that the plant doesn't get overwhelmed and go into shock on you.
Good to know. Did not know that about the size of plants or the pots. Good to know.
Yes. When we measure pots, like in our store, you'll see like on our labels, we put like this says this is a 4-inch Hayworthia. So we measure pot size by the opening diameter. And so that's how you'll see pot sizes listed online as well. It may say a 4-inch pot or a 6-inch pot or a 5.5-inch pot. It's just measuring the opening of the pot typically. And that's what you want to go by when you repot plants.
Oh, wow. Good to know. What are some other plants that bloom a lot that live well indoors?
So actually, succulents bloom a lot. If you can put them on like a windowsill where they get a lot of sun, even the Hayworthia, they will bloom. And so succulents tend to put out flowers, even cacti do. A lot of people don't know that cacti and succulents bloom. Peace lilies are a good one that will usually put out flowers. And then your aglaonemas or your Chinese evergreens, they will also put out some flowers very similar to peace lilies. That's really probably the extent of the things that we sell that will do well indoors, because like I said, typically for plants to flower, they prefer to be like in an outdoor environment with a lot of sunlight and the perfect, environment. So a lot of our plants will bloom like outdoors in other parts of the world, but they may not bloom inside of your home or office, but they can still live. It's no big deal if they don't bloom.
Perfect. Caitlin, can you talk a little bit about drainage and the best type of pots?
Absolutely. So we do typically recommend people put their plants in a pot with a drainage hole if they can. When in doubt, like terracotta or like the clay pots are a really good option for a lot of plants. Ferns and calatheas sometimes don't do as well in terracotta just because they do dry out quicker. And like I mentioned, those kind of like to stay a little bit more on the wet side. So we sell a lot of ceramic pots at the shop. And unfortunately, most cute pots nowadays don't come with a drainage hole. And so what we tell people is just take the pot, the ceramic pot, and then take your nursery pot that your plant is in. You can leave it in the nursery pot and just take it and sit it down inside of that ceramic pot. So that's called the cache pot method. It's basically just hiding your ugly green nursery pot in a pretty ceramic pot. So if you want to pot a plant in a pot that doesn't have a drainage hole, you can always put a layer of rocks at the bottom, a layer of activated charcoal, anything that's going to kind of help buffer. And I typically tell people cut back on your watering about half as often if you're watering a plant that does not have a drainage hole, because that water is not going to have anywhere to go, anywhere to escape from the pot. So instead of watering once a week, I typically water mine every 2 weeks if they don't have a drainage hole. But like I said, when in doubt, terracotta pots, they're cheap, they're great. Most plants are going to be really happy in those because you're not going to be able to overwater with a terracotta pot, and overwatering is truly the easiest way to kill houseplants. So terracotta is fantastic if you want to just stick with that.
Huh, who knew? How do I encourage my aloe to pup? It just keeps getting bigger.
Okay, so if you put your aloe or any succulents that kind of multiply like that, if you put them in a little bit wider pot, that gives them a little bit more room to spit off new growth. And so maybe it may just be time to kind of go up in pot size for your aloe plant, especially if the main plant is taking up most of that pot diameter. Just go up in pot size 1 to 2 inches, and that should allow some pups to grow around the edge of the pot.
Perfect. Let's see. Do you sell plant lighting solutions?
So we don't carry any grow lights at this time, but we do buy a lot of our grow lights from places like Amazon that you can do a multitude of things. Like we like to buy the clamp-on grow lights with multiple arms so that you can kind of direct the light where you want it to go. And then we also just buy like grow bulbs to screw into like lamps that we have. So if you're looking at that lighting situation, just a grow bulb in a lamp that you have, nobody would ever know that it's a grow light. And so on our website, actually under our plant care tips, we have a little section of like recommended products. And so we've listed all of those grow lights that we recommend with links to Amazon, so that you can just go straight there and buy it, with just things that we've tested and would recommend to people that we don't necessarily carry in the store. That's all available on our website as well. And that's botanicabhm.com if you guys aren't familiar with our website.
Okay, so in response to that, do the daylight LEDs with high lumens provide the full spectrum needed for indoors?
So that I'm not totally sure about. I know LED lights typically are fine. I personally use the daylight LEDs in my home, and I have noticed we'll start growing towards those lights, which means that I mean, it's working, it's growing. As far as like the full spectrum, I'm not totally sure, but it's something that you could totally experiment with too. And GE makes a really nice grow light bulb that looks very similar in lighting to the daylight bulbs, and so that's typically what we'll put in our lamps and things like that at the shops.
Perfect. Well, Caitlin, I think we made it through all of the questions that were submitted.
Yay! Thank you guys so much. I love talking plants and being able to answer questions, and so does our staff. So you guys feel free to drop by and ask whatever questions you have at our stores, and our staff will be more than happy to help.
Yes, if you guys are local to Huntsville, please go check out Botanica. It is located on Governor's Drive. They are also on Facebook, so you can keep up with the classes that Caitlin mentioned. There were a couple comments that came in that said that you did a great job educating them on all things plants. So you guys feel free to check out her social media and go visit some of her classes that she puts on as well. Thank you all so much for joining us. And Caitlin, seriously, you taught me so much. I'm sure everyone else can feel the same. And thank you for helping us to learn what office plants to put in our office and how to keep them alive. And I love the list that you gave us, that it is pretty easy, low maintenance plants that we can say, hey, I have a green thumb. So thank you.
Absolutely. Just get that confidence up.
Yes. So I hope you all have a wonderful day. And Caitlin, please go enjoy your plants for us, and we will come visit you soon.
Thank you guys so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.